3 days after my daughter Sarah died, I caught her husband smiling at her funeral. Not once, not by accident. 3 separate times. The first time, I told myself grief was playing tricks on me. The second time, I looked away because I didn't want to believe what I had seen. The third time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. My name is Michael Bennett, and at 67 years old, I thought I had already survived the worst day of my life when I buried my wife 12 years earlier. I was wrong. Nothing prepared me for standing beside my only child's coffin, while the man she married looked like he was trying not to celebrate. Sarah was 35 years old when she died. According to the police, it was a tragic accident. A rainy night, a slippery road, a vehicle that lost control and crashed into a concrete barrier. The official report was simple, too simple. At the time, I accepted it because grief doesn't leave much room for questions. When a police officer knocks on your door after midnight and tells you your daughter is gone, your mind stops working the way it should. For the next 3 days, I moved through life like a ghost. I signed papers, answered phone calls, picked out flowers, chose a photograph for the funeral program. People spoke to me, and I nodded, but most of their words never reached me. The only thing I could think about was Sarah. She had been the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday. She called me every morning before work, just to make sure I had taken my medication. After my wife died, she became the center of my world. Losing her felt like losing the last piece of my family. That was why the funeral home was packed. Friends from college, coworkers, neighbors, church members, former teachers. People lined up for nearly an hour just to pay their respects. Everywhere I looked, there were tears. Grown men cried openly. Women hugged one another. Even people who barely knew Sarah seemed genuinely heartbroken. Everyone looked devastated, everyone except Ethan. My son-in-law stood near the front, greeting guests. He wore a tailored black suit and carried himself like a man attending a business meeting. Whenever someone approached him, he lowered his head and spoke in a soft voice. He accepted hugs. He thanked people for coming. He played the role of grieving husband perfectly. But every so often, when he thought nobody was watching, his expression changed. The sadness disappeared. The tension vanished from his face. And for a brief second, a smile appeared. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief. It was something colder, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I hated myself for noticing it. Ethan had been part of our family for nearly 9 years. Sarah loved him. At least I believe she did. Sure, they argued like every married couple. Sure, there had been periods when she seemed stressed. But I never imagined anything serious enough to make me question him after her death. So I tried to ignore my instincts. I focused on the service instead. The pastor spoke about Sarah's kindness. He spoke about her generosity and the way she always put other people first. People laughed through tears as they shared stories about her. I should have been listening. Instead, I found myself watching Ethan. Halfway through the service, his phone vibrated. He checked the screen, and something happened that I will never forget. For the first time all day, I saw genuine emotion in his eyes. Not sadness, not grief, relief. It flashed across his face for less than a second before disappearing. But I saw it. Then, he quickly stood up and left the room. I don't know why I followed him. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was grief searching for someone to blame. Or maybe some part of me already knew the truth was waiting outside that chapel. I stepped into the hallway a few moments later and saw Ethan standing near a side exit with his back turned toward me. He didn't know I was there. He had his phone pressed against his ear. I wasn't close enough to hear everything, only fragments, but those fragments were enough. "Yes," he said quietly. "Everything's done." He listened for a moment and then laughed. Not loudly, just enough for me to hear it. "It's finally over," he said. My entire body went cold. I stood frozen in place. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe he was talking about funeral arrangements. Maybe he was discussing paperwork. Maybe grief was making me paranoid. But deep down, a question began growing inside my mind. Why would a man whose wife had been buried only minutes earlier sound relieved that something was over? Ethan ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. As he turned toward the parking lot, I saw that smile again. The same one I had seen beside my daughter's coffin. Small, quick, hidden from everyone else, but not from me. He climbed into his car and drove away. I stood there watching until he disappeared from sight. For the first time since Sarah died, I stopped asking how the accident happened. Instead, I started asking a different question. What exactly was Ethan so happy about? I had no idea that within 24 hours, I would find something hidden inside my daughter's old phone that would make me question everything I thought I knew about her marriage. And once I heard the recording she left behind, there would be no turning back. The morning after my daughter's funeral, I woke up with the same question running through my head. What exactly was Ethan so happy about? I tried convincing myself that I was overreacting. Grief can make people see things that aren't there. It can turn ordinary moments into suspicious ones. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget the look on Ethan's face when he stepped outside the funeral home. The relief, the smile, the phone call. None of it felt right. Around noon, I drove to the house Sarah and Ethan had shared for nearly 8 years. Ethan had called earlier and told me he planned to start organizing Sarah's belongings immediately. That alone felt strange. Most grieving spouses need weeks, or even months, before touching a loved one's things. Ethan couldn't even wait 4 days. When I arrived, the garage door was open and several cardboard boxes were stacked near the entrance. Ethan was carrying clothing from the bedroom. Just trying to stay busy, he told me when he saw me watching. It's better than sitting around thinking. His explanation sounded reasonable, but something about his tone felt rehearsed, like he had already practiced saying it. I offered to help and spent the next few hours sorting through Sarah's belongings. Every item felt like another small loss. Her favorite sweater, her reading glasses, a half-finished notebook sitting beside the bed. I found myself stopping every few minutes just to remember that she was really gone. Ethan didn't seem to have the same problem. He moved quickly, efficiently, almost impatiently. More than once, I noticed him checking his watch. It felt less like a grieving husband packing memories and more like a man trying to finish a task before a deadline. By late afternoon, he announced he needed to leave for a meeting with an insurance representative. The word insurance immediately caught my attention. Already? I asked. Ethan shrugged. There are a lot of things that have to be handled. Then he left. The moment his car disappeared down the street, I felt a strange urge to walk through the house one more time. Maybe I was looking for memories. Maybe I was looking for answers. I wasn't sure. Sarah's home office was almost empty. Most of the drawers had already been cleaned out. The shelves looked unusually bare. That bothered me because Sarah was an organized person. She kept records of everything: work documents, family photographs, personal journals. Yet somehow, only a few days after her death, much of it was already gone. I opened a closet near the office and found several storage bins waiting to be donated. Inside, one of them was an old tablet, some chargers, and a cracked smartphone I immediately recognized. It was Sarah's previous phone. She had replaced it about a year earlier. I almost tossed it back into the bin before realizing something. Sarah never threw away electronics. She saved everything because she worried about losing photographs and contacts. Curious, I slipped the phone into my pocket. A few hours later, I returned home and plugged it into a charger. To my surprise, it powered on. The lock screen displayed a photograph of Sarah smiling during a family barbecue. For a moment, I couldn't move. Seeing her face again felt like reopening a wound. Then, I noticed something even stranger. The phone had dozens of unread notifications from the weeks before her death. Most were ordinary emails, but one notification caught my attention immediately. It was a voice memo. The file had been created only 6 days before the accident. My heart started pounding. Sarah rarely recorded voice memos. I pressed play. At first, there was only silence and background noise. Then I heard Sarah's voice. She sounded nervous, not sad, not angry, afraid. "I don't care what you say anymore," she said. A man's voice answered. Ethan's voice. There was no doubt about it. The argument continued for several minutes. They were discussing money. Sarah accused him of hiding financial information from her. Ethan denied everything. Then the conversation became more intense. Sarah mentioned transfers she couldn't explain, accounts she had never seen before, payments made without her knowledge. My hands began shaking. This wasn't the marriage Ethan described after her death. This was something completely different. Then I heard Sarah say something that made my blood run cold. "You're lying to me again." Ethan responded with silence. Several seconds passed. Then Sarah spoke one final sentence. a sentence I replayed 3 times because I couldn't believe what I had heard. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. The recording ended immediately afterward. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the screen. Every rational explanation I had been clinging to suddenly began falling apart. Sarah had been afraid. Not stressed, not frustrated. Afraid. And she had specifically connected that fear to her husband only days before she died. I wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding. I wanted to believe there was context missing from the conversation. But deep down, another possibility was beginning to take shape. What if Sarah had discovered something dangerous before she died? And what if Ethan knew exactly what she had discovered? I barely slept that night. Around 3 in the morning, I opened the phone again and started searching through old messages. Most were ordinary conversations, family updates, work discussions, friendly jokes. Then I found a text message Sarah had sent to someone 2 weeks before the accident. The message contained only one sentence. "If I'm right about what Ethan is doing, I may need help." My heart nearly stopped, because the person she sent it to wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a friend. It was someone I hadn't heard from in years. Someone who once knew Ethan better than anyone else. And suddenly, I realized that if I wanted answers, that person would have to be the next place I looked. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the message Sarah had sent 2 weeks before her death. If I'm right about what Ethan is doing, I may need help. The person she sent it to was a man named Daniel Harper. Years earlier, Daniel and Ethan had worked together at the same financial consulting firm before Ethan left to start his own business. I hadn't spoken to Daniel in almost 5 years, but I still had his number. After staring at my phone for nearly an hour, I finally called him. The moment I mentioned Sarah's name, his voice changed. He sounded surprised, then concerned, then strangely cautious. When I told him about the text message, there was a long silence on the line. "Michael," he finally said, "I think we need to talk in person." 2 hours later, I met him at a small diner outside town. Daniel looked older than I remembered, tired, like someone who hadn't slept well in years. He listened carefully as I explained everything. The funeral, Ethan's behavior, the recording on Sarah's old phone, the message she had sent him. When I finished, he rubbed his forehead and stared out the window. "I was afraid of this," he said quietly. Those words immediately got my attention. "Afraid of what?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "Afraid that Sarah figured it out before I could warn her." My stomach tightened. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside were printed financial statements, business records, and copies of emails. 3 years ago, he explained, I started noticing irregularities in some accounts Ethan managed. According to Daniel, Ethan had built a reputation as a successful financial advisor. Clients trusted him. Investors respected him. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. But Daniel eventually discovered that Ethan had been secretly moving money through a network of shell companies. Small amounts at first, just enough to avoid attracting attention. Over time, the numbers grew larger. Much larger. I stared at the documents in disbelief. "Why wasn't he arrested?" I asked. Daniel gave a bitter laugh. "Because I couldn't prove it. Every time I got close, records disappeared. Witnesses changed their stories. Accounts were closed." Then he looked directly at me. But Sarah started asking questions. My heart sank. Daniel explained that several months earlier, Sarah had contacted him privately. She had found financial documents Ethan couldn't explain. Large transfers, hidden accounts, money moving between companies she had never heard of. At first she thought it was a mistake. Then she started digging deeper. The more she investigated, the more frightened she became. "She called me 6 weeks before the accident," Daniel said. "She wanted to know if I thought Ethan was stealing from clients." I could barely breathe. Everything was starting to connect. The fear in Sarah's voice, the recording on the phone, the message asking for help. Daniel opened another file and slid it across the table. Inside was a copy of a life insurance policy. My eyes immediately focused on the number at the bottom, $3 million. This policy was updated about a month before Sarah died, Daniel said. Guess who requested the increase? I already knew the answer. Ethan. My pulse started racing. Suddenly, the situation felt far worse than financial fraud. If Ethan was desperate enough to hide millions of dollars, what else was he capable of doing? Daniel leaned forward. Michael, I don't know if Ethan had anything to do with Sarah's death, but I know this. She discovered something that terrified her. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing documents. By the time we finished, one thing was clear. Sarah hadn't been imagining things. Ethan had been lying to her for months, maybe years. But there was still no direct evidence connecting him to her death. Without that, everything remained suspicion. As we prepared to leave, Daniel stopped me. There's one more thing. His expression had become serious again. Sarah told me she was keeping copies of everything. I looked at him. Copies? He nodded. Financial records, emails, screenshots. She said if something happened to her, she wanted proof to survive. My heart started pounding again. Where are they? Daniel shook his head. I don't know. She never told me. She said it was safer that way. For the first time that day, I felt a small spark of hope. If Sarah had really saved evidence, then the truth might still be out there, hidden somewhere Ethan hadn't found. That evening, I drove home with Daniel's folder, sitting on the passenger seat. My mind was racing. Sarah knew Ethan was hiding money. She was scared enough to seek help. She believed something bad might happen to her, and now she was dead. None of that felt like coincidence anymore. When I arrived home, I noticed something unusual immediately. My front door wasn't fully closed. At first, I thought I had forgotten to lock it. Then I saw the broken latch. Someone had forced their way inside. My heart slammed against my ribs. I rushed into the house. Drawers had been opened, cabinets searched, papers scattered across the floor. Whoever came here wasn't interested in stealing electronics or valuables. They had ignored my television. They had ignored cash sitting in a kitchen drawer. They were looking for something specific. Then my eyes landed on Sarah's old phone sitting on my desk. It had been moved, not stolen, just moved. Suddenly I realized something terrifying. Someone knew I had it, and whoever broke into my house wasn't looking for money. They were looking for evidence, the same evidence Sarah may have died trying to protect. I called the police as soon as I finished checking the house. 2 officers arrived within 30 minutes and conducted a routine investigation. They photographed the damaged door, collected fingerprints, and asked the same questions I expected them to ask. Had anything been stolen? Did I have enemies? Had I noticed suspicious activity in recent days? The problem was that I couldn't answer the most important question. I had no proof that the break-in was connected to Sarah's death. All I had was a feeling. The officers eventually left, promising to contact me if they found anything useful. The moment they drove away, I locked every door in the house and sat staring at Sarah's old phone. Whoever broke in had been searching for something. The mess inside my home made that obvious. But if they were looking for valuables, they would have taken them. Instead, they ignored everything worth money and focused on papers, drawers, and personal records. They were hunting information. That realization kept me awake most of the night. The following morning, I met Daniel again. When I told him about the break-in, his face immediately darkened. "You need to be careful," he said. "If someone is willing to break into your house, they may be more desperate than we thought." We spent several hours going through the contents of Sarah's old phone. Most of it was ordinary. Family photos, shopping lists, work emails. Nothing that explained why someone would risk a criminal charge to search my home. Then we found something unusual. Hidden inside a folder labeled Vacation Ideas was a collection of screenshots Sarah had saved only days before her death. The screenshots showed bank transfers between Ethan's business accounts and several companies neither of us recognized. The amounts weren't small. Some transfers exceeded $100,000. Others were much larger. Daniel studied the records carefully. "These companies are fake," he finally said. "At least on paper." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" Daniel pointed to one of the names. "It means somebody created these businesses to move money without attracting attention." The discovery answered one question, but created another. Why had Sarah hidden these screenshots instead of taking them directly to the police? The answer arrived later that afternoon. While searching through Sarah's emails, we found a draft she had never sent. It wasn't addressed to family. It wasn't addressed to friends. It was addressed to an attorney. In the email, Sarah explained that she believed her husband was involved in financial fraud. She also wrote something that made my chest tighten. "I'm afraid Ethan knows I'm asking questions." Those 7 words changed everything. This was no longer a story about a husband hiding money from his wife. Sarah genuinely believed she was in danger. As evening approached, Daniel suggested we contact the attorney whose name appeared in the draft email. The next day, we met her in person. Her name was Rebecca Lawson, and she immediately recognized Sarah's name. Rebecca confirmed that Sarah had contacted her 3 weeks before the accident. During their meeting, Sarah appeared nervous and repeatedly checked her phone as if she expected someone to be watching her. Rebecca said Sarah wanted advice before reporting financial crimes to federal authorities. "Did she give you any evidence?" I asked. Rebecca nodded. "Only enough to convince me she wasn't imagining things." Then she reached into a file cabinet and removed a sealed envelope. My heart nearly stopped. Sarah's name was written across the front in black ink. Rebecca explained that Sarah had left the envelope with instructions. If anything happened to her, Rebecca was supposed to hold it until a trusted family member came forward. My hands trembled as I accepted it. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. This was something my daughter had prepared before she died. Some part of her had expected the possibility that she might not be around to explain it herself. Finally, I opened the envelope. Inside were handwritten notes, several account numbers, and a short letter. I recognized Sarah's handwriting immediately. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means something has gone wrong." My vision blurred. I forced myself to continue. Sarah explained that she had discovered evidence suggesting Ethan was moving money through secret accounts. She believed some of the funds belonged to clients who trusted him with their investments. She also believed Ethan was becoming increasingly aware of her investigation. Then I reached the final paragraph. The words hit me harder than anything else I had read. "If I disappear or die unexpectedly, do not trust the official explanation until you know the truth." I sat frozen in silence. Every excuse I had made for Ethan over the previous week collapsed at once. Sarah hadn't simply been suspicious. She had been preparing for the possibility that something terrible could happen. Rebecca watched me carefully before speaking. "There's something else," she said. She handed me a business card with a name written on the back. Sarah wanted this person contacted only if she couldn't do it herself. I looked down at the card. The name meant nothing to me, but Daniel's reaction told a different story. The moment he read it, all the color drained from his face. "That's impossible," he whispered. "What is it?" I asked. Daniel stared at the card for several seconds before answering. "This man used to work with Ethan." He paused. "And 3 months ago, he disappeared without warning." Suddenly, the room felt colder. Because if Sarah had been investigating Ethan before she died, and another person connected to Ethan had vanished only months earlier, then my daughter's death might not be the only tragedy hiding behind his secrets. I couldn't stop thinking about the name on that business card. A missing former coworker, a frightened daughter, a husband hiding money. Individually, each piece was troubling. Together, they painted a picture I didn't want to believe. The next morning, Daniel and I started searching for information about the missing man. His name was Ryan Mercer. According to public records, Ryan had worked alongside Ethan for nearly 6 years before abruptly disappearing 3 months earlier. Officially, he had resigned from his position and relocated to another state. That explanation might have satisfied most people, but the more we investigated, the less believable it became. Ryan hadn't sold his house. He hadn't closed his local bank accounts. He hadn't informed most of his friends he was leaving. In fact, several people reported being unable to reach him after he supposedly moved away. It was almost as if he had vanished overnight. By noon, Daniel managed to contact a former colleague who knew Ryan well. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, but what we learned changed everything. 2 weeks before disappearing, Ryan had been involved in a heated argument with Ethan inside their office building. Several employees witnessed it. Nobody knew exactly what was said, but multiple people remembered Ryan accusing Ethan of lying and stealing. After that confrontation, Ryan stopped showing up to company gatherings. Then he disappeared entirely. My stomach twisted as I listened. Another person had discovered something. Another person had confronted Ethan. Another person had suddenly vanished from the story. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Later that afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected phone call from one of his former contacts in the financial industry. The man had quietly reviewed some of the account numbers Sarah left behind in her letter. What he found was alarming. Several shell companies linked to Ethan had received large deposits shortly before Sarah's death. One transfer in particular stood out. Nearly $400,000 had moved through 3 separate accounts in less than 48 hours. That's not normal business activity, Daniel said after ending the call. Someone was trying to hide where the money came from. For the first time, I began to understand why Sarah had been so frightened. This wasn't simple financial misconduct. The scale was much larger than I had imagined. That evening, I returned home exhausted. My mind was racing with questions I couldn't answer. As I stepped inside, I noticed a white envelope pushed beneath my front door. There was no stamp, no return address, no name, just an envelope. My heart immediately started pounding. I carefully opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Printed in large black letters were 6 words. "Stop looking before someone gets hurt." I stared at the message for several seconds. Then I read it again. And again. The threat was clear. Someone knew I was investigating. Someone wanted me to stop. For a moment, fear took hold. I was an old man who had already lost his daughter. The rational part of me understood that continuing could be dangerous. But another part of me felt something stronger than fear: anger. Sarah had been terrified before she died. She had left warnings, evidence, and instructions because she believed the truth mattered. If I walked away now, I would be abandoning her. I immediately called Daniel and told him about the letter. He arrived within an hour. After examining it, he agreed with my conclusion. The threat wasn't random. It was targeted. Whoever sent it knew exactly what we were doing. That realization led us to a disturbing question. How were they monitoring us? We reviewed every recent event: the break-in, the missing evidence, the anonymous warning. Then Daniel noticed something I had overlooked. The envelope had been delivered by hand. That meant someone had physically approached my house. Someone had likely been watching. We checked the security camera installed above my garage. The footage showed a hooded figure approaching shortly after sunset. The face was hidden, but one detail stood out. The person arrived in a vehicle registered to a private security company. Daniel immediately recognized the logo on the side of the truck. The company occasionally worked with businesses facing legal disputes and financial investigations. More importantly, one of their largest clients happened to be Ethan's firm. Suddenly, the threat felt much more real. Ethan wasn't simply reacting to events. He was actively trying to contain them. He knew there was evidence somewhere. He knew Sarah had uncovered something dangerous. And now he knew someone else was following the trail she left behind. Before leaving that night, Daniel handed me a flash drive. "What's this?" I asked. His expression was grim. "A backup of everything we've found so far." I nodded. Then he said something that sent a chill through my body. "Keep it somewhere safe. If anything happens to either of us, someone else needs to know the truth." After he left, I sat alone in the silence of my house, staring at the flash drive. The investigation had already become larger than I expected. Financial fraud, threats, a missing witness, a frightened daughter who predicted something bad would happen. But I still didn't have the one thing I needed most: proof connecting Ethan to Sarah's death. Without that, he could deny everything. Without that, he could continue pretending to be the grieving husband everyone believed him to be. Then, just before midnight, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I almost ignored it. Almost. When I answered, a nervous male voice spoke only one sentence before hanging up. "If you want the truth about Sarah's accident, check the repair records on her car." I stared at the phone long after the call ended. Because for the first time since Sarah died, someone wasn't talking about financial crimes. Someone was talking about the accident itself. The anonymous caller's words stayed in my head all night. "If you want the truth about Sarah's accident, check the repair records on her car." By sunrise, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers anymore. If someone out there knew something, I was going to find it. Before leaving the house, I called Daniel and told him about the phone call. He agreed to meet me at the repair shop that had serviced Sarah's vehicle 2 weeks before the accident. The shop owner was cooperative at first. He pulled up the records and confirmed that Sarah's SUV had been brought in for routine maintenance. New tires, oil change, brake inspection, nothing unusual. Then Daniel asked to see the technician's notes. The owner's expression immediately changed. He hesitated before handing over the paperwork. Most of the report was ordinary, but one line stood out. A follow-up service request had been submitted 3 days later by someone other than Sarah. The request involved the vehicle's braking system. My pulse quickened. "Who authorized this?" I asked. The owner checked the file and frowned. According to our records, it was her husband, Ethan. The name hit me like a punch to the chest. The owner explained that Ethan claimed Sarah had complained about a strange noise. A mechanic briefly examined the vehicle, but no major repairs were documented. On paper, everything appeared normal. But Daniel wasn't convinced, neither was I. As we left the shop, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. The driver wore sunglasses and appeared to be watching us. The moment I looked in his direction, he started the engine and drove away. Maybe it was a coincidence, maybe it wasn't. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Ethan. It was the first time he had contacted me since the funeral. His tone sounded polite, but something beneath the surface felt cold. He asked if we could meet to discuss Sarah's estate. I agreed. An hour later, we sat across from each other in a lawyer's office. What happened next completely changed the way I saw him. Ethan didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't mention Sarah. He didn't talk about grief. Instead, he immediately began discussing assets, the house, investment accounts, insurance benefits, personal property. It felt like listening to a businessman negotiating a transaction rather than a husband mourning his wife. Then he said something that made my blood boil. "I think it would be best if we sold the house quickly." I stared at him. Sarah had been dead for less than a week. "Why the rush?" I asked. Ethan shrugged. "There's no reason to keep holding on to the past." The words felt like a slap across the face. For a moment, I wanted to reach across the table and grab him by the collar. Instead, I stayed silent and watched him carefully. The more he spoke, the more obvious it became that he wasn't grieving. He was planning, calculating, looking ahead. Then came the moment that convinced me my suspicions weren't paranoia. Ethan casually mentioned that the life insurance company was expected to finalize payments soon. There was something almost excited in his voice when he said it. Not relief, excitement, as if he had been waiting for it. I left the meeting feeling physically sick. That night, I called Daniel and told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he remained silent for several seconds. "Michael," he finally said, "there's something you need to see." We met an hour later. Daniel had obtained copies of additional financial records connected to Ethan's accounts. One transaction immediately caught my attention. 2 days after Sarah's death, Ethan transferred a large amount of money into a private account. The timing was suspicious enough. The destination was even worse. The account belonged to a woman named Olivia Grant. My stomach tightened. "Who is she?" I asked. Daniel looked directly at me. "We think she's Ethan's girlfriend." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Sarah had barely been buried, and already another woman was receiving money from her husband. The anger I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had experienced since Sarah died. But Daniel wasn't finished. He slid another document across the table. It showed dozens of phone calls between Ethan and Olivia during the weeks leading up to the accident. Not after the accident. Before it. Hundreds of calls. Late-night conversations. Weekend meetings. Secret communication hidden from Sarah. The affair was real. Suddenly, the argument on the voice recording made much more sense. Sarah hadn't just discovered financial fraud. She had discovered betrayal, and maybe something even worse. I drove home that night, unable to stop thinking about Olivia, about the money, about the insurance policy, about Ethan's eagerness to move on with his life. Then, just as I was pulling into my driveway, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. Attached was a photograph. The image showed Ethan and Olivia sitting together at an upscale restaurant. The timestamp in the corner revealed it had been taken the evening after Sarah's funeral. While family members were still mourning her death, Ethan was having dinner with another woman. But it was the message beneath the photograph that truly stopped my heart. They thought Sarah would never find out what happened that night. Suddenly, this wasn't just about an affair anymore. Someone out there knew exactly what happened before my daughter died. I must have stared at that photograph for 10 straight minutes. Ethan and Olivia were sitting across from each other in a restaurant, less than 24 hours after Sarah's funeral. Neither of them looked heartbroken. Neither looked like people carrying the weight of a tragic loss. They looked comfortable, relaxed, familiar. The message beneath the image haunted me even more. They thought Sarah would never find out what happened that night. Whoever sent it clearly knew something. The question was whether they were trying to help me or manipulate me. I forwarded the photograph to Daniel immediately. He called within minutes. "Don't respond to the sender," he said. "Not yet. Let's figure out who we're dealing with first." The next morning, Daniel managed to trace the image metadata. The results weren't enough to identify the sender, but they revealed something interesting. The photograph had been taken from inside the restaurant by someone seated only a few tables away from Ethan and Olivia. This wasn't a random picture stolen from social media. Someone had intentionally followed them. Someone was watching. For the first time, I began to suspect that Sarah wasn't the only person investigating Ethan before her death. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I decided to learn more about Olivia Grant. Publicly, she appeared successful. She worked as a marketing consultant and had no criminal record. But the deeper we looked, the stranger things became. Olivia's name appeared in several financial transactions linked to Ethan's shell companies. Some payments were disguised as consulting fees. Others were labeled as business expenses. Together, they added up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. "She's not just a girlfriend," Daniel said. "She's involved." The realization hit me hard. If Olivia knew about the money, she might also know about Sarah's investigation, maybe even about the accident. We spent the next few days quietly gathering information. During that time, Ethan became increasingly aggressive. He called me repeatedly about the estate. He pushed for faster decisions. He pressured me to approve property sales. At one point, he even suggested donating some of Sarah's personal belongings because there was no point keeping old memories. Every conversation made him harder to tolerate. Every conversation made me understand why Sarah had become afraid of him. Then came the moment that changed everything. 3 days later, I received an unexpected visit from a woman named Jessica Reynolds. The moment she introduced herself, I recognized the name. Jessica had been Sarah's closest friend since college. She looked exhausted, as though she hadn't slept properly in weeks. We sat at my kitchen table, and after a few minutes of silence, she finally spoke. "I should have come sooner." There was guilt in her voice. Real guilt. She explained that Sarah had confided in her during the months leading up to the accident. Not everything, but enough. Sarah suspected Ethan was hiding money. She suspected he was cheating, and she had become increasingly convinced that someone was watching her. My pulse quickened. "Did she tell you why?" Jessica nodded slowly. Then she reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. "Because she found this." Inside was a hotel receipt dated 2 weeks before Sarah's death. The names listed on the reservation were Ethan Grant and Olivia Grant. Not Ethan Bennett, not Olivia using her real identity. They had deliberately used aliases. Sarah had apparently found the receipt hidden in Ethan's desk drawer. According to Jessica, that discovery was what convinced Sarah the affair was real. But there was something even more important inside the envelope. A handwritten note from Sarah. The note wasn't long, only a few sentences, yet every word mattered. Sarah wrote that she planned to confront Ethan with everything she had learned. The affair, the hidden accounts, the missing money. She believed he would lie. She believed he would deny everything. But she also believed she finally had enough proof to force the truth into the open. I felt my chest tighten as I read the final line. "If something happens after I confront him, don't let him get away with it." The room fell silent. Jessica was crying quietly. I wasn't far behind, because for the first time since Sarah died, I wasn't reading vague warnings anymore. I was reading a direct statement from my daughter. She expected a confrontation. She expected consequences. And somehow, only days later, she ended up dead. That night, after Jessica left, I sat alone looking through everything we had collected. The voice recording, the financial records, the insurance policy, the affair, the threats, the break-in, the anonymous messages. Each piece pointed in the same direction, yet I still lacked the one thing investigators needed: proof, real proof. Then my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. When I answered, a man's voice spoke quickly and nervously. "You don't know me," he said, "but I worked at the garage that inspected Sarah's SUV." My heart nearly stopped. Before I could ask a question, he continued. "The brake system wasn't normal. Someone told us not to document everything." The line went silent for a second. Then he added one sentence that changed the entire investigation. "And the person who gave those instructions wasn't your daughter." He hung up before I could say another word. I barely slept after the call from the garage employee. For days, I had been collecting fragments of a story that refused to fit together. Sarah's fear, Ethan's affair, the hidden money, the threats, the break-in. Now, for the first time, someone connected directly to the accident was suggesting that records had been altered. If that was true, everything changed. The next morning, Daniel and I arranged to meet the caller in person. He refused to meet at his workplace and insisted on a location nearly 40 miles outside the city. His nervousness told me this wasn't someone looking for attention. This was someone genuinely afraid. We found him sitting alone in a corner booth of a small roadside diner. His name was Kevin Ross. He looked over his shoulder 3 separate times before speaking. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "Then why are you?" Daniel asked. Kevin took a deep breath. "Because I've got a daughter too." That answer told me everything I needed to know about his state of mind. Kevin explained that he was one of the mechanics who inspected Sarah's SUV shortly before the accident. According to the official records, nothing significant had been found. That wasn't entirely true. During the inspection, another technician noticed unusual wear inside part of the braking system. It wasn't enough to prove sabotage, but it was unusual enough to recommend additional testing. The recommendation never appeared in the final report. "Why not?" I asked. Kevin swallowed hard. "Because our manager removed it." My pulse immediately quickened. Kevin explained that later that same day, a man came to the garage asking questions about Sarah's vehicle. He wasn't family. He wasn't law enforcement. He wasn't an insurance investigator. He was Ethan. According to Kevin, Ethan spent nearly an hour speaking privately with management. Afterward, the original notes were revised. Certain observations were removed. The vehicle was cleared. Officially, there was nothing wrong with it. My stomach turned. "Do you have proof?" Daniel asked. Kevin hesitated before sliding a flash drive across the table. I made a copy before the files were changed. My heart nearly stopped. This was the first piece of evidence directly connected to the accident itself. The first indication that someone might have interfered with the investigation. Daniel carefully pocketed the drive without opening it. The fewer people who saw it publicly, the safer it would remain. Before leaving, Kevin grabbed my arm. "There's something else," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "The manager who changed the report quit 2 weeks later." "Where is he now?" I asked. Kevin shook his head. "Nobody knows. Another person disappearing. Another loose end connected to Ethan. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore." Later that afternoon, Daniel and I reviewed the contents of the flash drive. The original inspection notes were still there. The missing recommendation was clearly documented. More importantly, timestamps proved the files had been altered after Ethan visited the garage. It wasn't enough to prove murder, but it was enough to prove someone wanted information hidden. For the first time, I felt like we were getting close to something real, maybe too close. Because that evening, Ethan showed up at my house unannounced. The moment I opened the door, I knew something was different. Gone was the calm, controlled widower everyone saw in public. He looked angry, not grieving, angry. "You've been asking a lot of questions," he said. There wasn't even an attempt to hide the accusation. I stared back at him. "Maybe because my daughter is dead." His jaw tightened. "You're embarrassing yourself." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter had been buried less than 2 weeks earlier, and he was worried about embarrassment. Then he made the biggest mistake yet. "Sarah had problems," he said. "She was paranoid. She imagined things." The moment those words left his mouth, I felt something inside me snap. Not because I believed him. Because Sarah had told me the exact opposite through every piece of evidence she left behind. Ethan wasn't defending himself anymore. He was rewriting her memory. He was trying to turn a dead woman into an unreliable witness. I stepped closer. "Is that what you're going to tell everyone?" I asked. "That she imagined the affair? The money? The lies?" For a fraction of a second, his expression changed. Fear. Real fear. It vanished almost immediately, but I saw it, and he knew I saw it. Without another word, Ethan turned and walked away. But before getting into his car, he looked back at me. "Let it go, Michael," he said coldly. "For your own sake." Then he drove off into the darkness. I stood there for several minutes after he disappeared. The threat wasn't hidden anymore. It wasn't implied. Ethan knew I was investigating. He knew I wasn't going to stop, and for the first time, he was starting to lose control. 2 days later, that fear would push him into making the biggest mistake of his life. A mistake that would place him directly at the scene of a secret meeting he desperately wanted erased forever. After Ethan left my house, I couldn't stop replaying the look on his face. For weeks, he had acted like a man in complete control. Calm, calculated, patient. But for a brief moment during our confrontation, that confidence cracked. He wasn't worried about grief. He wasn't worried about rumors. He was worried about what I might discover next. That realization stayed with me over the following days. The pressure was clearly getting to him. People make mistakes when they feel cornered. The question was whether Ethan would make one big enough for us to finally expose him. The answer arrived sooner than I expected. 2 days later, Daniel called me before sunrise. His voice carried a level of urgency I hadn't heard before. "Check your email," he said. "Right now." I opened my laptop and found several photographs attached to a message from an anonymous sender. The photographs had been taken the previous night. In them, Ethan was entering an abandoned commercial property on the edge of town. The building had once been a small warehouse, but had been empty for years. The images showed him arriving alone shortly after midnight. Another photograph showed a second vehicle arriving 20 minutes later. The driver wasn't visible, neither was the passenger. But whoever had taken the photographs clearly wanted us to see them. Attached to the email was a short message. "Ask why they're meeting there." That was it. No explanation. No name. Nothing else. Daniel arrived at my house less than an hour later. We studied the photographs together. The timestamp confirmed they were recent. The location was real. And if Ethan was secretly meeting someone in an abandoned warehouse after midnight, it certainly wasn't business as usual. We decided not to contact the police yet, not without knowing more. Instead, Daniel used one of his contacts to pull property records. What he found surprised both of us. The warehouse wasn't abandoned at all. It had been quietly purchased 8 months earlier by a limited liability company. The company's owner wasn't listed publicly, but after several hours of digging, Daniel uncovered something interesting. One of the shell companies connected to Ethan's financial records had paid taxes on the property. Suddenly, the warehouse became much more important. Later that afternoon, we drove there ourselves. The building sat at the end of an industrial road surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusted fencing. From a distance, it looked completely deserted. But as we got closer, signs of recent activity became obvious. Tire tracks, fresh security cameras, new locks on the doors. Someone was using the building. We stayed only a few minutes before leaving. Neither of us wanted to attract attention. That evening, Daniel received another message from the same anonymous source. This time, there was a video clip. The footage was grainy and only lasted 30 seconds, but it was enough. Ethan appeared near the entrance of the warehouse speaking to another man. The audio was weak. Most of the conversation couldn't be understood. Then one sentence became clear. "The old man is becoming a problem." I felt my stomach drop. There was no doubt who Ethan meant. Me. The clip ended abruptly. For several seconds, neither Daniel nor I spoke. Ethan wasn't just aware of my investigation. He was discussing me with unknown associates during secret late-night meetings. The situation had become far more dangerous than either of us originally believed. The following morning, Daniel managed to identify the second man from the video. His name was Victor Hale. Unlike Ethan, Victor had a criminal history: fraud, witness intimidation, financial crimes. Nothing violent, but enough to raise serious concerns. More importantly, Victor had worked as a consultant for several businesses connected to Ethan's hidden accounts. Their relationship went back years. That discovery gave us our first direct connection between Ethan's financial fraud and someone with a documented history of helping people cover their tracks. But the most important development happened later that day. Jessica called unexpectedly. She sounded frightened. She explained that someone had been following her home from work. A dark sedan remained behind her vehicle for nearly 30 minutes before finally turning away. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. Then she saw the same car parked outside her apartment that evening. My heart sank. Ethan wasn't just watching me anymore. He was watching people connected to Sarah. The circle was widening. The pressure was growing. And that usually meant one thing: he was afraid. That night, I sat alone reviewing everything we had gathered. The affair, the hidden money, the altered vehicle records, the threats, the warehouse, Victor Hale. Each piece strengthened the case, yet we still lacked the single piece of evidence capable of destroying Ethan publicly. Then, just before midnight, another email arrived from the anonymous sender. This one contained only a photograph. The image showed Ethan leaving the warehouse carrying a cardboard storage box. Written across the side of the box was a label. The moment I read it, my heart nearly stopped. Because printed clearly on the label were two words I never expected to see: Sarah Bennett. Suddenly, I wasn't wondering whether Ethan had hidden evidence anymore. I was wondering what evidence belonging to my daughter had been sitting inside that warehouse all along. I must have looked at that photograph 100 times. Every piece of evidence we had uncovered pointed toward Ethan. But this was different. This wasn't another financial record or suspicious transaction. This was a storage box carrying my daughter's name. A box hidden inside a warehouse, secretly connected to Ethan's shell companies. The question wasn't whether it mattered. The question was, what Ethan was so desperate to keep hidden. The next morning, Daniel and I met before sunrise. Neither of us wanted to wait another day. We reviewed the photograph again and noticed something important. Attached to the label was a storage inventory number. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Daniel contacted one of his former investigative colleagues, and by late afternoon, we had a partial inventory record. The warehouse wasn't being used for normal business operations. It functioned as a private document storage facility. Most of the boxes belonged to companies connected to Ethan's financial network, but one inventory record stood out. Sarah's name appeared on a box registered less than 48 hours after her death. My stomach turned. Why would a dead woman's belongings be secretly moved into a warehouse she never knew existed? That question haunted me for the rest of the day. Then something happened that made the answer even more frightening. Around 6 that evening, Jessica called again. This time she wasn't scared. She was furious. Earlier that day, Ethan had visited Sarah's former office. According to one of her coworkers, he demanded access to her workstation and personal files. When management refused, Ethan threatened legal action. My pulse immediately quickened. He wasn't mourning. He was searching. The same way someone had searched my house. The same way someone had hidden Sarah's box in the warehouse. Ethan was hunting for something. The only question was whether he had already found it. 2 days later, we got our chance. The anonymous sender contacted us again. This time there was no photograph, no cryptic message, just a date, a time, and a simple instruction. Tomorrow night. Warehouse entrance. Come alone. Daniel hated the idea immediately. So did I. It could have been a trap. It could have been Ethan. It could have been anyone. But after everything that had happened, neither of us could ignore it. The following night, we parked several hundred yards away and approached on foot. The industrial area was nearly deserted. The only sounds came from distant traffic and the wind rattling against old metal fencing. We reached the warehouse shortly before the scheduled time. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then a figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't Victor Hale. It was a woman in her late 40s, wearing a baseball cap and dark jacket. She looked nervous, terrified actually. "You Michael Bennett?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She glanced around before handing me a small envelope. Sarah gave me this. My heart nearly stopped. "Who are you?" I asked. "I worked for one of Ethan's companies," she replied. Sarah came to me because she thought records were being destroyed. The woman explained that several weeks before her death, Sarah had secretly copied documents she believed Ethan was trying to hide. She planned to deliver them to federal investigators after gathering enough evidence, but she became increasingly afraid someone was watching her. That's why she created backups, multiple backups. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten note. The handwriting belonged to Sarah. I recognized it instantly. The note was short, much shorter than the letter Rebecca had given me, but it contained the most important words I had seen since her death. "Dad, if you're reading this, Ethan knows what I found." I felt my throat tighten. Sarah continued by explaining that she had uncovered transactions involving stolen client funds, hidden accounts, and falsified records. She believed Ethan wasn't acting alone. Other people were involved. Powerful people, wealthy people, people with every reason to keep the truth buried. Then I reached the final paragraph. My entire body went cold. If anything happens to me before I can expose them, check the security footage from the night of my accident. Someone was following me. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. Security footage. Nobody had ever mentioned security footage. Not the police. Not the insurance company. Nobody. The woman standing before us noticed my expression. "There's more," she said quietly. Sarah wasn't the only one investigating. Daniel and I looked at each other. "What do you mean?" The woman swallowed hard. "Ryan Mercer found the same fraud months earlier." My heart sank. Ryan. The missing coworker. The man who vanished after confronting Ethan. The woman lowered her voice even further. "Ryan didn't disappear." A chill ran down my spine. "Then where is he?" I asked. The woman hesitated. For a moment, it looked like she might refuse to answer. Then she finally spoke. "The last person seen with Ryan before he vanished was Ethan." Suddenly, the investigation wasn't just about my daughter's death anymore. It was about a trail of people who discovered the truth and then disappeared from Ethan's life forever. The night I read Sarah's note about the security footage, I finally understood something important. For weeks, Ethan had been reacting to us. He was deleting records, moving documents, intimidating witnesses, and threatening anyone who got too close. That meant he was scared. And scared people eventually make mistakes. The next morning, Daniel and I reviewed everything we had collected. For the first time since Sarah died, we stopped looking for new evidence and started asking a different question. How do we make Ethan expose himself? The answer came from Ethan himself. 2 days later, he filed a formal petition to gain complete control over the remaining assets connected to Sarah's estate. The request wasn't illegal. As her surviving spouse, he had certain rights, but the timing was disgusting. Sarah had been dead less than 3 weeks, and Ethan was already trying to consolidate everything under his control. Worse, the filing included several statements claiming Sarah had suffered from emotional instability before her death. The moment I read those words, I felt sick. Ethan wasn't just protecting himself anymore. He was attacking Sarah's memory. He was building a narrative that she had been confused, paranoid, and unreliable. If people believed that story, then every warning she left behind would become easier to dismiss. Every suspicion would look like imagination. Every piece of evidence would look less credible. That was the moment I stopped seeing Ethan as a grieving husband who might be hiding something. I saw him for what he really was. A man willing to destroy a dead woman's reputation to save himself. Jessica reacted even more strongly. When she learned about the filing, she nearly broke down. Sarah had spent her entire life helping people. She volunteered, donated money, supported friends through divorces, illnesses, and financial hardship. Now the man she trusted most was publicly describing her as unstable. The cruelty of it made everyone angry. And Ethan didn't stop there. A week later, he attended a community fundraiser that Sarah had helped organize every year. Hundreds of people were present, former coworkers, friends, neighbors, members of her church. During a conversation near the stage, Ethan casually suggested that grief had caused some family members to invent conspiracy theories about Sarah's accident. He never mentioned my name directly. He didn't need to. Everyone knew exactly who he meant. Several people later told me they felt uncomfortable listening to him. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. There was no sadness in his voice, no heartbreak, only irritation, like Sarah's death had become an inconvenience. The fundraiser created the first real crack in Ethan's public image. People started asking questions. Why was he pushing so hard to control the estate? Why was he attacking Sarah's character? Why did he seem more concerned about rumors than about losing his wife? For the first time, he wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. Then, something unexpected happened. One of Ethan's former clients contacted Daniel privately. The man had heard about the growing controversy and wanted to talk. According to him, Ethan had pressured multiple clients into moving money through investment structures that later disappeared. The client wasn't willing to go public yet, but he confirmed something important. Ethan's financial problems were growing, fast. Several accounts were under review. Auditors were asking questions. Regulators had started requesting records. The walls were closing in. That explained why Ethan seemed increasingly desperate. It also explained his next mistake. 3 days later, he called me directly. Not his lawyer, not an assistant. Ethan himself. His voice sounded calm at first, but I could hear the anger beneath it. He accused me of spreading lies. He accused me of turning people against him. Then he made an offer. If I publicly stopped questioning Sarah's accident, he would ensure there were no further disputes over the estate. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter was dead, and he was trying to negotiate my silence. I refused immediately. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. Before hanging up, Ethan said something I will never forget. "You're not helping Sarah by doing this." I sat staring at the phone after the call ended. Because, for the first time, Ethan wasn't speaking like an innocent man defending himself. He was speaking like someone terrified of what might happen if the truth reached the wrong people. Later that evening, Daniel called with new information. The security footage Sarah mentioned actually existed. A traffic camera near the highway had recorded part of her route on the night of the accident. Obtaining the footage legally would take time, but the request had already been submitted. If the recording still existed, we would finally know whether another vehicle had been following Sarah before she died. For weeks, everything had been theory, suspicion, circumstantial evidence. But now we were getting close to something far more dangerous for Ethan. Actual proof, and judging by the way he was behaving, I had a feeling he knew it too. The moment Ethan tried to buy my silence, I knew we were getting closer to the truth. Innocent people defend themselves. Guilty people try to control the people asking questions. For nearly a month, Ethan had been moving evidence, intimidating witnesses, attacking Sarah's reputation, and pressuring everyone around him. Now he was making offers. That wasn't confidence. That was fear. The following week became the turning point in the entire investigation. The traffic camera request was still being processed, but Ethan didn't know exactly what we had or what we were looking for. That uncertainty was eating him alive. Meanwhile, the damage to his public image was growing. More people were starting to talk. Sarah's friends began comparing stories. Former coworkers started remembering strange incidents. Small details that once seemed meaningless suddenly looked very different when placed beside everything else. Then Ethan made another mistake. A huge one. During a meeting regarding Sarah's estate, he publicly claimed that Sarah had become emotionally unstable during the final months of her life. He insisted her judgment had been impaired. He suggested her fears and accusations were the result of anxiety rather than evidence. Unfortunately for Ethan, Jessica was present. So were several of Sarah's friends. The reaction was immediate. People who had known Sarah for years openly challenged him. One woman stood up and reminded everyone that Sarah had managed multi-million-dollar projects at work until the week she died. Another described Sarah as one of the most organized and reliable people she had ever met. Ethan tried to defend himself, but the room was no longer on his side. For the first time, he looked rattled. The confident widower mask was beginning to crack. But what happened afterward was even more important. As people left the meeting, Ethan lost his temper. Not completely, just enough. He cornered Jessica in the parking lot and demanded to know what she had told me. Jessica later described his behavior as frightening. His voice wasn't loud, but it was angry, aggressive, desperate. He kept asking the same question. What did Sarah leave behind? When Jessica refused to answer, Ethan finally walked away. But the damage was done. Until that moment, Jessica had only suspected Ethan was hiding something. After that conversation, she became convinced, because innocent people don't obsess over what a dead woman may have left behind. That same evening, Daniel received a call from one of his contacts inside a regulatory agency. Several of Ethan's financial records had officially been flagged for review. The investigation wasn't public yet, but auditors were beginning to uncover discrepancies. Large discrepancies. Millions of dollars could no longer be properly accounted for. The walls were moving closer. Fast. Then came the breakthrough we had been waiting for. 3 days later, the traffic camera footage finally arrived. I remember sitting beside Daniel as the video loaded onto his computer screen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. The footage wasn't perfect. The camera was positioned several miles from the accident site, but it clearly captured Sarah's SUV traveling along the highway approximately 20 minutes before the crash. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then Daniel paused the video. A black sedan appeared behind her vehicle. We watched again. The sedan remained there, mile after mile, exit after exit. It never passed, never turned away. It simply followed. We checked additional footage from a second traffic camera farther down the road. The same sedan appeared again, still behind Sarah, still following. My pulse accelerated. This wasn't proof of murder, but it was proof that Sarah hadn't been alone that night. Then Daniel enhanced one of the frames. The license plate wasn't fully visible, but part of it could be read. We ran the partial number through available records. The result shocked both of us. The vehicle was registered to a company associated with Victor Hale, the same Victor Hale we had seen meeting Ethan at the warehouse. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is the first thing Ethan can't explain away." And he was right. Affairs could be denied. Financial records could be manipulated. Witnesses could be attacked. But a vehicle connected to Ethan's closest associate, following Sarah on the night she died, was something entirely different. For the first time, the accident itself was becoming part of the story. Yet the biggest shock was still waiting. Less than 24 hours after obtaining the footage, Ethan did something completely unexpected. Instead of laying low, he called for a public gathering. He claimed he wanted to honor Sarah's memory and put the rumors to rest. Friends, family members, coworkers, and community leaders were invited. On the surface, it looked like a memorial event, but Daniel immediately understood what Ethan was doing. "He's trying to take control of the narrative," he said, "before the truth catches him." Ethan thought he could stand in front of everyone, play the grieving husband one last time, and bury the questions permanently. What he didn't know was that by the time he stepped onto that stage, we would already know far more than he imagined. And before that event was over, someone in the crowd was going to make a decision that would destroy him. The moment I heard Ethan was organizing a public memorial event for Sarah, I knew exactly what he was trying to do. For weeks, the narrative had slowly slipped from his control. Too many questions were being asked. Too many people were starting to notice the contradictions. Ethan needed a stage. He needed sympathy. Most of all, he needed people to stop looking at him and start looking at Sarah. The event was held at a community center Sarah had supported for years. More than 200 people attended: friends, family members, former coworkers, local business leaders, church members. Reporters from 2 local newspapers even showed up after hearing rumors about the growing controversy surrounding her death. As I entered the building with Daniel and Jessica, I immediately noticed Ethan moving through the crowd. He was smiling, shaking hands, accepting condolences, playing the role of grieving widower better than ever. But this time something was different. People weren't looking at him the way they had during the funeral. There was hesitation in their eyes, doubt, suspicion. They had started asking questions too. The event began with a video tribute to Sarah's life. Photographs from childhood, family vacations, college graduation, her wedding day. For a few minutes, I forgot about the investigation and simply missed my daughter. Then Ethan stepped onto the stage. The room became silent. He started well. He spoke about Sarah's kindness, her generosity, her career. He thanked everyone for their support. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, his speech changed direction. He began talking about grief, then stress, then emotional struggles. Before long, he was carefully planting the same narrative he had been building for weeks. Sarah had been overwhelmed. Sarah had been anxious. Sarah had become suspicious of people around her. Nothing direct, nothing obvious, just enough to make listeners question her judgment. I looked around the room and saw uncomfortable expressions appearing everywhere. People were listening, but they weren't buying it. Then, Ethan made the mistake that destroyed him. He said Sarah had become obsessed with imaginary conspiracies during the final months of her life. The moment those words left his mouth, a woman near the front row stood up. It was Sarah's former supervisor. She calmly explained that Sarah had successfully managed one of the largest projects in the company's history only weeks before her death. Another coworker stood up and confirmed it, then another. One after another, people began contradicting Ethan publicly. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Ethan tried to laugh it off, but he was losing control. The audience could feel it. Then something happened that none of us expected. A man slowly stood near the back of the room. I didn't recognize him at first, neither did Ethan. But Daniel did. The color immediately drained from his face. "Oh my God," he whispered. The man started walking toward the front. Every eye in the room followed him. Ethan stopped speaking. For several seconds, nobody said a word. Then the man reached the center aisle and looked directly at Ethan. "You told everyone I disappeared," he said. The room froze. My heart nearly stopped. It was Ryan Mercer, the missing coworker, the man we had spent weeks investigating, the man everyone believed had vanished. He wasn't dead. He wasn't missing. He was standing right there. A wave of whispers swept through the audience. Ethan looked like he had seen a ghost. Ryan's voice remained calm, but the anger behind it was impossible to miss. He explained that, after discovering irregular financial activity inside Ethan's business network, he had confronted him. Shortly afterward, he began receiving threats. Not direct threats, indirect ones, enough to convince him that staying silent was safer than fighting. Ryan eventually left town and disappeared intentionally to protect himself and his family. But when he learned about Sarah's death and saw Ethan attacking her reputation, he decided he couldn't remain silent anymore. Ethan tried interrupting him. Ryan ignored him. Then Ryan revealed something even worse. Before Sarah died, she had contacted him directly. She wanted advice. She wanted confirmation that she wasn't imagining things. Ryan confirmed that she wasn't. He told the audience Sarah had discovered the same financial fraud he had uncovered months earlier. The room erupted. People were no longer whispering. They were openly reacting. Shock, anger, confusion. Reporters started taking notes furiously. Ethan looked completely trapped. Every time he attempted to respond, another question came from the crowd. Another contradiction. Another challenge. Years of carefully built reputation were collapsing in real time. But Ryan wasn't finished. Before stepping away from the microphone, he said one final sentence that changed everything. Sarah wasn't investigating alone. Then he pointed toward the audience. A woman near the side wall slowly stood up. I recognized her immediately. She was the former employee who had delivered Sarah's flash drive at the warehouse. Until that moment, nobody knew she was there. The entire room turned toward her. She looked terrified, but she also looked determined. And judging by Ethan's face, he knew exactly what she was about to say. Because whatever secret she had kept hidden until now, it was the one thing Ethan feared most. The moment the woman stood up, the entire room fell silent. A few minutes earlier, Ethan had still been trying to control the event. He had been smiling, shaking hands, and presenting himself as a grieving husband unfairly targeted by rumors. Now he looked trapped. Ryan Mercer had already destroyed the story Ethan spent weeks building. But judging by the fear on Ethan's face, the woman standing near the side wall frightened him even more. She slowly walked toward the front of the room. Every step seemed to make Ethan more uncomfortable. Reporters stopped taking notes and lifted their phones. People leaned forward in their seats. Nobody wanted to miss what was coming next. When she reached the stage, she introduced herself as Karen Mitchell, a former financial compliance officer who had worked with one of Ethan's affiliated companies. Several people in the audience immediately recognized her. Ethan certainly did. Karen's hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady. She explained that she had remained silent for months because she was afraid, not only for herself, but for her family. However, after Sarah's death, and after hearing Ethan publicly attack her reputation, she decided she could no longer stay quiet. Ethan tried interrupting her almost immediately. Karen ignored him. Then she revealed the first bombshell. Months before Sarah died, she had secretly met with Sarah on multiple occasions. Sarah had approached her because she believed financial records were being altered. Karen confirmed that those suspicions were correct. She personally witnessed documents disappear, transactions change, reports modified after audits had already been completed. Murmurs spread across the room. Ethan's attorney attempted to object, but nobody was listening anymore. The audience wanted answers. Karen then revealed that Sarah wasn't simply collecting evidence of fraud. She was preparing to deliver the information to federal investigators. The room became even quieter. Ethan's expression hardened. For the first time all evening, the confident mask disappeared completely. He looked desperate, angry, cornered. Then Karen opened a folder she had carried onto the stage. Inside were copies of internal emails exchanged between Ethan, Victor Hale, and several business associates. She handed them directly to the reporters sitting near the front row. Panic flashed across Ethan's face, real panic. The emails showed discussions about moving money between shell companies, hiding losses, and delaying audits. None of them directly proved murder, But they completely destroyed Ethan's claim that Sarah had imagined everything. She had been right. About all of it. Then Ryan stepped forward again. Together, he and Karen explained how Sarah had spent the final weeks of her life gathering evidence because she believed Ethan's operation was becoming more dangerous, more reckless, more desperate. Several members of the audience openly confronted Ethan. Former clients demanded explanations. Coworkers questioned his statements. The room was turning against him, fast. Then came the moment nobody expected. One of the reporters asked a simple question. "Mr. Bennett, if Sarah was wrong about everything, why were her concerns identical to concerns raised by Ryan Mercer months earlier?" Ethan opened his mouth but couldn't answer. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. People noticed. Reporters noticed. Everyone noticed. The narrative he had carefully built was collapsing. Then Daniel stood up. He wasn't supposed to speak. We had agreed to stay quiet unless necessary, but he had reached his limit. He walked toward the front of the room carrying a folder. Inside were copies of the original garage inspection records and the traffic camera images showing Victor Hale's vehicle following Sarah on the night of the accident. Daniel didn't accuse Ethan of murder. He didn't need to. He simply presented the facts. The audience could draw its own conclusions. By now, people weren't looking at Ethan with sympathy anymore. They were looking at him with suspicion. Some looked disgusted. Others looked furious. The reporters were practically fighting to ask questions. Ethan's attorney repeatedly attempted to end the event, but nobody was paying attention. Then Ethan made the worst mistake of his life. Instead of remaining silent, he exploded. He accused Ryan of lying. He accused Karen of betrayal. He accused me of destroying Sarah's legacy. The room gasped. Because for the first time all evening, people saw the real Ethan. Not the polished businessman, not the grieving widower. A furious man losing control in front of hundreds of witnesses. His face turned red. His voice shook. Every sentence made things worse. Then he pointed directly at me and shouted, "You should have let this go." The words echoed through the room. Complete silence followed. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because everyone understood exactly what they had just heard. Not the words themselves, the emotion behind them. Ethan wasn't speaking like a victim. He was speaking like a man terrified of being exposed. Security eventually stepped in as the chaos continued. Reporters surrounded Ryan and Karen. Audience members openly argued with Ethan. Several former clients left the event immediately after learning about the financial allegations. Years of reputation were being destroyed in a single evening. As I watched everything unfold, I realized something important. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Public opinion had finally shifted. People were asking questions Ethan could no longer control. And when powerful people lose control, investigators start paying attention. 2 days later, they would. Because early the following morning, federal agents would arrive with warrants. And what they found inside Ethan's office would remove any chance he had left of escaping the consequences. 2 days after the memorial disaster, federal agents arrived at Ethan's office before sunrise. By noon, news of the investigation had spread across the city. Employees were escorted from the building while agents carried out boxes of financial records, computers, and storage drives. For years, Ethan had built his reputation as a successful businessman and trusted advisor. In less than a day, that reputation began collapsing. The public story moved quickly. First came reports of financial fraud, then hidden accounts, then shell companies, then witness statements. Every day seemed to bring another revelation. Reporters camped outside Ethan's office. Former clients demanded answers. Investors hired attorneys. Business partners rushed to distance themselves. The empire Ethan spent years building was falling apart faster than anyone imagined. But none of that mattered to me as much as one thing: Sarah. I wanted the world to know she had been telling the truth. 3 weeks later, investigators contacted Daniel and me. The search warrants had uncovered thousands of records. More importantly, they found internal communications linking Ethan and Victor Hale to multiple fraudulent transactions. The financial case was devastating. Yet another discovery proved even more important. Investigators recovered deleted communications, showing that Ethan became aware of Sarah's investigation weeks before her death. He knew she was collecting evidence. He knew she was speaking with other people. He knew she was preparing to expose him. While the evidence still could not conclusively prove he caused the crash itself, it completely destroyed his version of events. Sarah had not been paranoid. She had not imagined anything. She had uncovered a real criminal operation. The truth was finally emerging. Over the following months, more witnesses came forward. Karen testified. Ryan testified. Former clients testified. Even people who had remained silent for years suddenly found the courage to speak. The case grew larger with every hearing. Then came the moment nobody expected. Victor Hale agreed to cooperate. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the possibility of spending decades in prison, he accepted a deal and began talking. The information he provided shattered what remained of Ethan's defense. Financial records, secret meetings, destroyed documents, witness intimidation. Everything investigators suspected was confirmed. Ethan's attorneys tried to fight back, but the damage was irreversible. The trial lasted nearly 4 months. Every day brought new testimony. Every day brought new evidence. And every day, Ethan looked less like the respected businessman people once admired, and more like the man Sarah had tried to expose. Then came the verdict. I still remember standing inside that courtroom as the jury returned. The room was completely silent. Ethan sat at the defense table staring forward. For the first time since Sarah died, he looked afraid. Truly afraid. Not angry, not arrogant, afraid. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts of financial fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and witness intimidation. Several of his associates were convicted as well. As the verdicts were read, I watched Ethan's face carefully. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't look at Karen. He simply stared forward as the life he built disappeared in front of him. Then, the judge delivered a sentence that ensured Ethan would spend many years behind bars. The courtroom erupted. Some people cried. Others hugged one another. Reporters rushed toward the exits to file their stories. Yet none of that was the moment that stayed with me. The moment I remember happened afterward. As deputies prepared to escort Ethan away, he finally turned in my direction. For several seconds, we simply looked at each other. Then he lowered his eyes. No excuses, no arguments, no threats, nothing. For the first time, he looked like a man who understood he had lost everything. Months later, a community event was organized in Sarah's honor. Hundreds of people attended: friends, family, coworkers, neighbors, people whose lives she had touched. During the ceremony, the organizers announced the creation of the Sarah Bennett Integrity Scholarship, funded in part by recovered assets from the fraud investigation. The scholarship would help young women pursuing careers in finance and ethics. As people applauded, I found myself thinking about the last conversation I ever had with Sarah. She once told me that the truth mattered, even when it was inconvenient, expensive, or painful. Looking around that room, I realized she had been right. Her voice had survived. Her courage had survived. Her truth had survived. After the ceremony ended, I drove to the cemetery alone. The sun was beginning to set as I stood beside her grave. For a long time, I said nothing. Then I placed my hand on the headstone and finally spoke the words I had carried inside me since the day she died. You were right, Sarah. Tears filled my eyes, but for the first time, they weren't tears of helplessness. They were tears of peace. The people who tried to bury the truth had failed. The people who tried to silence her had failed. Her name had been cleared. Her courage had been recognized. Her story had changed lives. As I walked back toward my car, I realized something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. They took my daughter from this world far too soon, but they never got what they wanted most. They never buried the truth. And in the end, the truth destroyed them instead.